Sarah Martinez had learned to walk with her head down. The birthmark that covered the left side of her face from her temple to her jaw had been her constant companion since birth. It was deep purple, almost like spilled wine, and no amount of makeup could completely hide it. At 23, she worked as a janitor at the Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Every morning at 5, she would arrive before most people were awake, hoping to clean the offices and hallways while avoiding too many stairs. The job paid enough to support her younger brother's college tuition, and that was all that mattered to her. Sarah had always been invisible, and she preferred it that way. In school, kids had called her Monster Face and Purple Freak. Teachers would speak to her with pity in their voices, as if her birthmark somehow affected her brain too. She had stopped looking in mirrors years ago, except for the quick glances needed to brush her teeth or tie back her long black hair. The Air Force Base was supposed to be different. Military people were disciplined, professional. At least that's what Sarah had hoped when she took the job 6 months ago. The pay was better than her previous cleaning jobs, and the work was steady. Most importantly, she could do her job without having to interact with many people. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chun, had been kind during the interview. She looked Sarah directly in the eyes when speaking to her, not once glancing at the birthmark. "We need someone reliable and hardworking," Mrs. Chun had said. "Your references are excellent. Can you start Monday?" Sarah had nodded eagerly. Finally, a place where she might belong, but even at the base, she couldn't escape the stares and whispers. Some of the younger airmen would stop talking when she entered a room, then burst into muffled laughter after she passed. Others would openly stare, some with curiosity, others with disgust. She had developed a routine to minimize these encounters. She would start in the administrative buildings before dawn, then move to the training facilities during lunch when most people were eating. The hangars were her favorite place to clean, because they were usually empty except for the massive aircraft that couldn't judge her appearance. Sarah's only real friend was Maria, another janitor who worked the evening shift. They would overlap for 30 minutes each day, and Maria would always greet her with a genuine smile. Maria was in her 50s, originally from Mexico, and she treated Sarah like the daughter she never had. "Mia, you are beautiful," Maria would say in her accented English. "Those people, they have ugly hearts. You have a beautiful heart." Sarah appreciated Maria's kindness, but she had long ago accepted her fate. She was meant to live in the shadows, to be the person who cleaned up after others but was never truly seen or valued for who she was inside. That acceptance would be challenged in ways she never expected. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Sarah arrived at the base at 5 a.m. sharp, signed in with the security guard who barely looked up from his newspaper, and collected her cleaning supplies from the storage room. Her first stop was always the main administrative building, where the base's leadership had their offices. She pushed her cart down the polished hallway, the wheels squeaking softly in the pre-dawn silence. The building felt peaceful at this hour, almost sacred. Sunlight was just beginning to filter through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. She would soon mop as she began dusting the reception area. Sarah heard voices coming from the conference room. This was unusual. Meetings rarely started before 7 a.m. She tried to work quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever important discussion was taking place behind those doors, but as she moved closer to empty the trash can near the conference room, the voices became clearer. They were laughing about something, and she caught fragments of their conversation through the slightly open door. "Did you see the new janitor they hired?" one voice said. Sarah's blood turned cold. She knew they were talking about her. "The one with the thing on her face?" Another voice replied, "How did she even get hired looking like that?" The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. Sarah stood frozen, clutching the trash bag in her hands, unable to move forward or backward. "I heard she applied 3 times before they finally gave her the job," the first voice continued. "Probably felt sorry for her. I mean, who else would hire someone who looks like that?" "She gives me the creeps," a third voice added. "I try not to look directly at her when she's cleaning my office. It's like looking at a car accident." More laughter erupted from the room. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had heard worse before. She could handle this, but then came the words that cut deepest of all. My kids would run screaming if they saw her face. Thank God she works early morning shifts so the important visitors don't have to see her. The trash bag slipped from Sarah's numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. The voices in the conference room immediately stopped. Sarah quickly picked up the bag and hurried away, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. She found refuge in a supply closet, where she finally allowed herself to cry. These weren't teenage bullies or ignorant civilians. These were educated military officers, people who were supposed to represent honor and dignity. If they saw her as nothing more than a monster to be hidden away, what hope did she have anywhere else? For the first time since taking this job, Sarah considered quitting. Maybe it was time to accept that some people were meant to live completely invisible lives. Maybe trying to find a place where she belonged was just setting herself up for more pain. She wiped her tears with a paper towel and looked at her reflection in the small mirror hanging inside the supply closet. The birthmark stared back at her, as prominent and purple as ever. Maybe they're right, she whispered to herself. Maybe I am too ugly for this world. But she had her brother's tuition to think about, and bills to pay. She couldn't afford to quit, no matter how much their words had hurt her. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped back into the hallway. She would finish her shift, just like always. She would remain invisible, just like always. She had no idea that in a few hours, everything would change in a way that would shake the very foundation of who she thought she was meant to be. Colonel James Mitchell was having the worst morning of his career. The newly appointed wing commander of Nellis Air Force Base had discovered that several of his senior officers were involved in a harassment incident that had reached the Pentagon's attention. What made it worse was that he was still learning the details, and each new piece of information made his blood boil hotter. At 45, Colonel Mitchell had served in 3 combat tours and earned respect throughout the Air Force for his unwavering integrity. He was known for his fairness, his dedication to his troops, and his absolute zero tolerance for discrimination or harassment of any kind. His own daughter had been born with cerebral palsy, and he had spent years fighting for her right to be treated with dignity and respect. That morning, he had arrived at his office at 6 a.m. to find a formal complaint letter on his desk. It had been submitted anonymously through the base's suggestion box, but it detailed a conversation that had taken place in the main conference room the previous morning. The letter described how several officers had made cruel comments about a female janitor's appearance, mocking her facial birthmark and questioning why she had been hired. Colonel Mitchell read the letter 3 times, his jaw tightening with each word. This was exactly the kind of behavior that destroyed unit cohesion and violated everything the Air Force stood for. But what made him even angrier was the personal connection he felt to this situation. His daughter Emma was now 16, and despite her challenges, she had grown into a confident young woman. But Colonel Mitchell remembered the early years, the stares from strangers, the cruel comments from other children, the way some adults would speak to her as if she couldn't understand them. He had spent countless hours teaching Emma that her worth wasn't determined by how others saw her physical differences. Now, in his own command, his officers were behaving just like those ignorant strangers who had hurt his daughter. Colonel Mitchell called his aide, Lieutenant Rodriguez, into his office immediately. I want you to find out exactly who was in the main conference room yesterday morning between 5 and 7 a.m., he ordered. Get me the sign-in logs, security footage, and meeting schedules. I want names. Lieutenant Rodriguez had worked with Colonel Mitchell for 2 years and recognized the controlled fury in his commander's voice. Yes, sir. Should I ask what this is regarding? Harassment complaint. And Rodriguez? I want this handled with complete confidentiality until I've had a chance to investigate personally. Within an hour, Lieutenant Rodriguez returned with a list of 5 names: Major Thompson from Personnel, Captain Williams from Operations, Captain Davis from Logistics, First Lieutenant Brown from Administration, and Master Sergeant Parker from Maintenance. They had been conducting an early morning briefing about base security protocols. Colonel Mitchell studied the names. These were men he had worked with, respected professionals who should know better. The disappointment cut almost as deep as the anger. I also have some information about the janitor they were discussing, Lieutenant Rodriguez continued carefully. Her name is Sarah Martinez. She's been employed here for 6 months. Excellent work record, no complaints, always punctual. Mrs. Chun speaks very highly of her work ethic. Colonel Mitchell nodded. I want to meet with Miss Martinez privately. Can you arrange that without making it seem like she's in trouble? I don't want her to worry that this complaint has somehow backfired on her. I'll speak with Mrs. Chun. Perhaps we can arrange it as a routine employee check-in? Good, make it happen this afternoon. But Colonel Mitchell wasn't content to wait. He decided to take a walk around the base during the morning cleaning hours. He wanted to observe Sarah Martinez working. To see for himself the woman his officers had felt comfortable mocking, he found her in Hangar 7, methodically cleaning the floor around a massive C-130 transport plane. She worked with quiet efficiency, her movements practiced and thorough. When she noticed him approaching, she immediately stepped aside and lowered her head respectfully. Good morning, sir, she said softly, not making eye contact. Good morning. You're Sarah Martinez, correct? Yes, sir. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Colonel Mitchell studied her face, noting the prominent birthmark that covered much of her left side. But what struck him more was the way she carried herself, shoulders hunched, head down, as if she was trying to take up as little space as possible. It reminded him painfully of how his daughter used to behave in public before she learned to be proud of who she was. How are you finding your work here at the base, Miss Martinez? Sarah seemed surprised by the question. It's fine, sir. I like the work. Mrs. Chun is very kind. And the other personnel? Are they treating you with proper respect? For just a moment, Sarah's eyes flicked up to meet his. Colonel Mitchell saw pain there, quickly hidden behind a practiced mask of indifference. Everyone's been professional, sir, she said carefully. Colonel Mitchell recognized the diplomatic non-answer. This young woman had clearly learned not to make waves, not to complain, even when she was being mistreated. The protective instincts he felt for his own daughter flared up immediately. Miss Martinez, I want you to know that every person on this base, regardless of their rank or position, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. If anyone is making you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome, I want to know about it. That's not a request, it's an order. Sarah looked up again, this time with surprise and something that might have been hope. Thank you, sir, but really I'm fine. I just want to do my job? Colonel Mitchell nodded, but he could see the walls she had built around herself. Breaking through them would take time and patience. Very well, but my door is always open if you need anything. As he walked away, Colonel Mitchell felt his resolve hardening. Those 5 officers had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. More importantly, Sarah Martinez was about to discover that she had an ally in the most powerful position on the base. He spent the rest of the morning reviewing Air Force regulations on harassment and discrimination. By lunchtime, he had developed a plan that would not only address this specific incident, but send a clear message to everyone on the base about what kind of command he intended to run. Colonel Mitchell believed in second chances, but he also believed in consequences. The 5 officers who had mocked Sarah Martinez were about to face both. The first phase of his plan would begin immediately. He called Lieutenant Rodriguez back into his office. I want you to schedule individual meetings with Major Thompson, Captain Williams, Captain Davis, Lieutenant Brown, and Master Sergeant Parker for tomorrow morning. 15 minutes apart, starting at 0800. Tell them it's a routine command assessment interview. Yes, sir. Should I prepare any specific materials? Just make sure we have copies of the harassment complaint and the base's equal opportunity policies. And Rodriguez? I want you to personally escort each of them to my office. I don't want them having a chance to compare notes beforehand. Lieutenant Rodriguez nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Understood, sir. As his aide left to make the arrangements, Colonel Mitchell turned to look out his office window at the base below. Somewhere out there, Sarah Martinez was continuing her work, probably believing that the cruel words she had overheard were just part of life she had to accept. She was wrong about that. Tomorrow, she would begin to understand that she had value beyond what she could see in the mirror, and his officers would learn that their new wing commander took the welfare of every person under his command very seriously indeed. The next morning arrived with an unusual tension in the air. Major Thompson was the first to be called to Colonel Mitchell's office at exactly 8 a.m. He walked in with the confidence of a man who had no idea his world was about to crumble. "Good morning, Colonel," Major Thompson said with a casual smile. "Rodriguez said you wanted to see me for a command assessment?" Colonel Mitchell gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down, Major. I do want to assess something, but it's not what you might expect." Major Thompson settled into the chair, still relaxed. Colonel Mitchell opened the file folder on his desk and pulled out a printed copy of the anonymous complaint letter. "Major, I'm going to read you something, and I want you to listen very carefully." Colonel Mitchell's voice was calm but cold. He began reading the letter aloud, word for word, including the cruel comments about Sarah Martinez. As the reading continued, Major Thompson's face went from confusion to recognition to horror. By the time Colonel Mitchell finished, the Major's face had turned pale. "Sir, I can explain." "Explain what, Major?" "Explain how a senior officer in the United States Air Force thought it was appropriate to mock a civilian employee's physical appearance. Explain how you questioned the hiring decision of a woman based solely on her looks rather than her qualifications." Major Thompson opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no defense for what he had said. Colonel Mitchell leaned forward. "Let me tell you about Sarah Martinez, Major. She has a perfect attendance record. Her supervisors describe her work as exceptional. She's supporting her younger brother's college education on a janitor's salary. She applied for this job 3 times not because she's desperate, but because she believes in serving her country in whatever capacity she can." The Major stared at his hands. "Now let me tell you about yourself," Colonel Mitchell continued. "You're a 14-year veteran with an outstanding service record. You've led troops in combat. You've earned the respect of your peers. And yesterday morning you threw all of that away to make jokes about a woman's birthmark. Sir, it wasn't meant to be malicious. We were just what? Just having a laugh at the expense of someone who can't defend herself? Just reinforcing the idea that people with physical differences don't belong in your Air Force." Colonel Mitchell stood and walked to the window. "Major, my daughter was born with cerebral palsy. For 16 years, I've watched her fight for acceptance in a world that often sees her disability before it sees her humanity. She's taught me that courage isn't about flying combat missions or leading troops into battle. Real courage is getting up every morning when the world tells you that you're not good enough and doing your job anyway." He turned back to face Major Thompson. "Sarah Martinez has more courage in her little finger than you showed in that conference room." The Major's voice was barely audible. "What happens now, sir? Now you're going to learn what accountability looks like. You have 2 choices. Option 1, I can file formal charges through the Inspector General's office. This will result in an official investigation, likely a reprimand in your permanent record, mandatory sensitivity training, and possible reassignment. Your career advancement will be severely impacted." Major Thompson winced. Option 2. You accept personal responsibility for your actions and participate in a restorative justice process that I'm designing specifically for this situation. This will involve a formal apology to Miss Martinez, mandatory volunteer work with disability advocacy organizations, and leading sensitivity training for the entire base. You'll also be writing a letter to my daughter, explaining what you've learned from this experience. I choose option 2, sir. Absolutely option 2. Good, but understand this, Major. Your choice of option 2 isn't a lighter punishment, it's a harder one. You're going to confront the impact of your words and actions head-on. If you fail to complete any aspect of this process with genuine commitment, we'll proceed with option 1. Major Thompson nodded vigorously. I understand, sir. I want to make this right. Report to Lieutenant Rodriguez at 1400 hours for your first assignment. Dismissed. After Major Thompson left, Colonel Mitchell called in Captain Williams. The conversation followed a similar pattern: initial confusion, growing horror at hearing the complaint letter, and ultimate acceptance of responsibility. Each officer chose option 2. By noon, all 5 men had been through Colonel Mitchell's office. Each had left with a clear understanding that their behavior was unacceptable and that meaningful change was required. Not just punishment, but Colonel Mitchell's plan was far from complete. The hardest part was yet to come: convincing Sarah Martinez that she deserved the respect and dignity that had been denied to her. He had scheduled a meeting with her for 2 p.m. Mrs. Chen had told her it was a routine employee evaluation. Nothing to worry about. But Colonel Mitchell knew that Sarah would be nervous regardless. People in her position had learned to expect the worst from interactions with authority figures. When Sarah knocked on his office door at exactly 2 o'clock, Colonel Mitchell could see the anxiety in her posture. She entered hesitantly, keeping her head down. "Please have a seat, Miss Martinez. Thank you for coming." Sarah perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to flee at any moment. "Mrs. Chun said you wanted to do an employee review, sir?" "In a way, yes. But first I want to ask you about something that happened yesterday morning. Were you working in the administrative building around 6 a.m.? Sarah's face went even paler. "Yes, sir. I hope I didn't disturb anyone. I try to work as quietly as possible." "You didn't disturb anyone, Miss Martinez. But I believe you may have overheard a conversation that was inappropriate and hurtful." Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly. "I don't know what you mean, sir." Colonel Mitchell's voice gentled. "Sarah, someone filed a complaint about comments that were made regarding your appearance. I know you heard those comments. I can see it in your eyes." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "They weren't wrong. What did you say?" "They weren't wrong, sir. I do look like... I know I'm not easy to look at. I know I shouldn't have been hired for a job where people have to see me. I was going to put in my resignation today." Colonel Mitchell felt his heart break a little. This was exactly what he had feared, that Sarah had internalized the cruel words and believed them. "Miss Martinez, look at me." Reluctantly, Sarah raised her eyes to meet his. "Those men were completely, absolutely wrong. About everything. Your appearance has nothing to do with your worth as a person or your value as an employee. The only thing wrong with yesterday's conversation was that it happened at all." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But they said things that revealed their own character flaws, not yours. And they will be held accountable for those words." Colonel Mitchell reached into his desk and pulled out a letter. "This is a formal commendation for your outstanding work performance over the past 6 months. Mrs. Chun submitted it weeks ago, before any of this happened. She specifically mentions your attention to detail, your reliability, and your positive attitude." He handed the letter to Sarah, whose hands were shaking as she read it. "Sarah, I want you to understand something very important. Every single person on this base, from the newest recruit to me, has value and deserves respect. Your birthmark doesn't change that. Your quiet nature doesn't change that. The ignorant comments of a few officers certainly don't change that." Tears were flowing freely down Sarah's face now. No one has ever said anything like that to me before." "Then it's long past time someone did." 3 days later, the entire base was buzzing with unprecedented activity. Colonel Mitchell had called for an all-hands assembly, something that hadn't happened in over 2 years. What made it even more unusual was that civilian employees were specifically invited to attend. Not just military personnel. Sarah Martinez stood in the back of the packed auditorium, feeling overwhelmed by the sea of uniforms around her. She had never attended a base-wide meeting before. Mrs. Chun had insisted she come, saying that Colonel Mitchell had specifically requested the presence of all civilian staff. The 5 officers who had mocked her were seated in the front row, looking uncomfortable and nervous. Sarah still couldn't believe that Colonel Mitchell had actually held them accountable for their words. In her experience, people in power protected each other, and people like her were told to just accept whatever treatment they received. But Colonel Mitchell was proving to be different from anyone she had ever encountered. As the wing commander took the podium, the auditorium fell silent. His presence commanded immediate attention and respect. "Good afternoon," Colonel Mitchell began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the room. "I've called this assembly to address an issue that goes to the heart of what we stand for as members of the United States Air Force and as human beings." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the hundreds of faces looking up at him. 3 days ago, I received a complaint about harassment that took place on this base. The details of that complaint were deeply disturbing, not because of what was said, but because of the mindset it revealed among some of our personnel. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not what most people had expected from a routine assembly. The harassment involved cruel comments about a civilian employee's physical appearance. Comments that were not only unprofessional and unacceptable, but that violated the core values we have sworn to uphold. Colonel Mitchell's voice grew stronger. The Air Force core values are integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. When we mock someone for their physical appearance, we violate all three of these values simultaneously. Sarah felt hundreds of eyes beginning to turn toward her, and she instinctively tried to shrink further back against the wall. But Colonel Mitchell's next words stopped her. "I want to tell you about someone who embodies these core values better than some of our own officers. Sarah Martinez is a civilian employee who has worked on this base for 6 months. She has perfect attendance, exceptional work performance, and has never filed a single complaint despite facing treatment that would have broken a lesser person." Sarah's heart began pounding. Why was he talking about her in front of everyone? Miss Martinez supports her younger brother's college education on her salary. She applied for this job 3 times because she believes in serving her country in whatever capacity she can. She comes to work every day at 5 a.m. and performs her duties with professionalism and pride, despite facing stares and whispers and worse from people who should know better. Colonel Mitchell gestured toward the back of the auditorium. "Sarah, would you please come forward?" Sarah's legs felt like water. This was her worst nightmare, being the center of attention in a room full of people. But the authority in Colonel Mitchell's voice left no room for refusal. On unsteady legs, she began walking down the aisle. The walk felt like it took forever. Sarah could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense people noticing her birthmark, could imagine the whispers that would follow. But as she reached the front of the auditorium, something unexpected happened. One person began clapping. Then another. Then another. By the time Sarah reached the stage, the entire auditorium had erupted in thunderous applause. Sarah stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. These people were clapping for her? For someone they had been taught to pity or ignore? Colonel Mitchell waited for the applause to die down before continuing. "What Miss Martinez represents is the best of what service looks like. She serves with dignity, with humility, and with dedication, asking for nothing more than the respect that every human being deserves." He turned to face the 5 officers in the front row. "Unfortunately, 5 members of our command failed to show her that respect. They failed to see past physical appearance to recognize character and worth. They failed to uphold the standards we expect from our military personnel." Major Thompson and the others looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. These 5 individuals have accepted responsibility for their actions and have agreed to participate in a restorative justice process. They will be making formal apologies to Miss Martinez, participating in sensitivity training, and working with disability advocacy organizations to better understand the impact of their words and attitudes. Colonel Mitchell's voice took on a harder edge. "But their accountability is just the beginning. Today, I am implementing new policies for this base that will ensure this kind of harassment never happens again." He outlined a comprehensive program that included mandatory sensitivity training for all personnel, the establishment of a confidential reporting system for harassment complaints, and regular diversity and inclusion workshops. Furthermore, he continued, I am creating a new position, base inclusion advocate. This position will be responsible for ensuring that every person who works on this base, regardless of their rank, position, or physical appearance, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Colonel Mitchell turned to Sarah, who was still standing frozen beside him. Miss Martinez, if you're willing, I would like to offer you this position. Your salary would be doubled, and you would report directly to me. Your job would be to ensure that no one else has to endure what you've experienced. Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. This couldn't be real. People like her didn't get promoted. They didn't get offered positions of responsibility. They certainly didn't get doubled salaries. I know this is sudden, Colonel Mitchell said gently. You don't have to answer right away. Take time to think about it. But Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by finding her voice. I accept, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The applause that erupted this time was even louder than before. Sarah looked out at the sea of faces and saw something she had never seen before when people looked at her: respect, admiration, and acceptance. After the assembly ended, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her and introduce themselves. For the first time in her life, people were seeking her out, wanting to know her as a person rather than avoiding her because of her appearance. Maria, her friend from the evening cleaning crew, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. Mia, I told you that you were beautiful inside. Now everyone can see it too. As the crowd eventually dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with Colonel Mitchell in the now empty auditorium. Why? She asked simply. Why do you do all this for me? Colonel Mitchell smiled. Because every person deserves an advocate, Sarah. And sometimes, the people who have faced the most adversity are the best equipped to help others who are facing similar challenges. He paused, then added, My daughter has cerebral palsy. I've spent years watching her fight for acceptance and respect. When I saw what happened to you, I saw her. I saw every person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. Sarah nodded, understanding flooding through her. What happens now? Now you get to help create the kind of workplace where no one has to walk with their head down, where everyone's contributions are valued, where diversity is seen as a strength, not something to be hidden or mocked. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Sarah caught her reflection in the glass doors. For the first time in her life, she didn't look away. The birthmark was still there, as prominent as ever, but somehow it no longer seemed like the most important thing about her. She was Sarah Martinez, base inclusion advocate. She was someone who mattered. She was someone who had been chosen not despite her differences, but because of what those differences had taught her about strength, resilience, and the true meaning of service. 2 weeks into her new role as base inclusion advocate, Sarah was discovering that changing hearts and minds was more complex than she had anticipated. Her office, located in the main administrative building, had become a sanctuary for people who had never felt safe. Speaking up about discrimination or harassment, the first person to seek her help was Herman Rodriguez, a young Latino man who had been facing constant jokes about his accent and heritage from his squad leader. He sat across from Sarah's desk, nervously fidgeting with his cap. I keep telling myself it's just teasing, he said quietly. But it happens every day. Sergeant Johnson calls me Speedy Gonzalez and makes comments about how I should go back where I came from. When I mess up anything, even small mistakes, he says it's because people like me don't belong in technical positions. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes. 3 weeks ago, she might have told him to just ignore it, to accept it as part of life. Now she understood that acceptance of discrimination only allowed it to flourish. You're right to come forward, she told Rodriguez. What you're describing is textbook harassment based on national origin. No one should have to endure that as part of their job. But what if it makes things worse? What if reporting it just makes him angrier? Sarah understood his fear completely. I can't promise there won't be challenges, but I can promise that you won't face them alone. We have policies now to protect people who report harassment, and Colonel Mitchell takes these issues very seriously. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Okay, what do I need to do? As Sarah walked him through the reporting process, she felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. She was helping someone find their voice. Just as Colonel Mitchell had helped her find hers, the case became her first official test as base inclusion advocate. After documenting Rodriguez's complaints and gathering witness statements, she presented the case to Colonel Mitchell. Within 48 hours, Sergeant Johnson was facing disciplinary action and mandatory counseling, but the real victory came a week later when Rodriguez stopped by her office with a smile on his face. Sergeant Johnson apologized, he said. Actually apologized. He said the counseling sessions made him realize how his words were affecting people. He asked if he could take me to lunch to talk about how to be a better leader. These small victories began to accumulate. Sarah's office became known as a place where people could speak honestly about their experiences without fear of retribution. She helped resolve conflicts between personnel from different backgrounds, organized cultural awareness events, and worked with supervisors to create more inclusive environments. But her biggest challenge was yet to come. One afternoon, Master Sergeant Patricia Williams knocked on Sarah's door. Williams was a 20-year veteran with a reputation for being tough but fair. She was also someone who rarely showed vulnerability. I need to talk to someone, Williams said, her usual commanding presence replaced by uncertainty. I'm not sure if this falls under your purview, but I don't know where else to go. Sarah invited her to sit. What's on your mind, Sergeant Williams? Williams was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. I'm gay. I've been in the closet my entire career. Even though Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed years ago, I've been too scared to come out. But now, she paused, struggling with the words. My partner of 10 years is dying, cancer, she's in her final stages, and I want to be with her during her last weeks. But if I request family leave, I'll have to explain who she is. I'll have to come out to my entire chain of command. Sarah felt the weight of this woman's trust. Williams was confiding something that could still impact her career and her relationships with fellow service members. What are you most afraid of? Sarah asked gently. Losing respect. Being treated differently. Having 20 years of service reduced to just being the gay sergeant, and honestly, I'm scared of being seen as weak. I've built my reputation on being tough, and I'm afraid that if people know about my relationship, they'll see me differently. Sarah understood this fear intimately. She had spent her entire life believing that her physical difference made her weak, made her less than others. But she had learned something important in the past month. Sergeant Williams, can I tell you what I've discovered about strength? Williams nodded. Real strength isn't about hiding who you are to avoid judgment. Real strength is being authentic despite the possibility of judgment. You've served this country honorably for 20 years. You've earned respect through your actions, your leadership, and your dedication. Those things don't change based on who you love. Williams wiped away a tear she probably didn't want Sarah to see. Your partner needs you, Sarah continued, and you deserve to be there for her without having to choose between your personal life and your career. Let me help you navigate this. Sarah worked with Williams to develop a plan. She coordinated with the legal office to ensure all paperwork was properly filed, spoke with Williams' commanding officer ahead of time to explain the situation, and arranged for Williams to have the family leave she needed. The response surprised everyone. Williams' unit rallied around her, offering support and taking up a collection to help with medical expenses. Her commanding officer personally called to express his support and to thank her for her years of service when Williams returned to work 6 weeks later. After her partner's funeral, she stopped by Sarah's office. You changed my life, she said simply. Not just by helping me get the leave, but by helping me understand that I don't have to choose between being authentic and being respected. Sarah smiled. You did the hard part. You found the courage to be vulnerable and ask for help. No, Williams said firmly. You showed me that vulnerability is a form of strength. Just like you did when you accepted Colonel Mitchell's offer in front of the entire base. These conversations were happening throughout the base. People who had spent years hiding parts of themselves, accepting discrimination, or simply feeling isolated were finding their voices and their communities. Colonel Mitchell had been watching Sarah's progress closely, and he was impressed not just by her ability to resolve conflicts, but by her capacity to help people discover their own strength and worth. "You're a natural at this," he told her during one of their weekly meetings. "Have you thought about pursuing formal training in conflict resolution or human resources?" Sarah looked up, surprised. "I barely finished high school, sir. I never thought about college." "Well, maybe it's time to start thinking about it. The base has educational assistance programs. With your experience and natural abilities, you could pursue a degree in psychology, social work, or organizational development." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah Martinez, college student? 3 months ago, she would have laughed at the suggestion. Now it seemed like a possibility worth exploring that evening. Sarah called her younger brother, Miguel, who was finishing his junior year at Arizona State University. "Sis, are you serious about this?" he asked when she told him about Colonel Mitchell's suggestion. "You want to go to college?" "I think I do." "Is that crazy?" "It's not crazy at all. You know, I always wondered why you were so smart but never pursued education. I used to think you could do anything you set your mind to." Sarah felt tears welling up. "Really? Really? And Sarah, I'm proud of you. Not just for this college idea, but for everything you've done in the past month. You've turned your life completely around." After hanging up, Sarah looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The birthmark was still there, but she realized she had stopped seeing it as a flaw to be hidden. It was simply a part of her, like her brown eyes or her small hands. She was Sarah Martinez, base inclusion advocate. Soon she might also be Sarah Martinez, college student. The future, which had once seemed like a narrow path of invisibility and acceptance, was opening up into something much broader and brighter. The girl who had walked with her head down was learning to look up and see possibilities she had never imagined. 6 months after her promotion, Sarah was preparing for her first major presentation to the Pentagon's Equal Opportunity Office. Nellis Air Force Base had become a model for inclusion and diversity programs throughout the military, and senior leadership wanted to understand how such dramatic cultural change had been achieved so quickly. Sarah stood in her apartment bathroom, practicing her speech in front of the mirror. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now comfortable giving presentations to high-ranking officials. When 6 months ago she couldn't make eye contact with a single person, her apartment had changed too. The walls, once bare and colorless, now displayed photos from base events she had organized, certificates from her online college courses, and a large framed picture of her graduation from conflict resolution training. The small space reflected a life that was finally being lived rather than simply endured. The success of her inclusion program had been remarkable. Harassment complaints had dropped by 80%. Base morale surveys showed significant improvement in workplace satisfaction. More importantly, personnel from diverse backgrounds were reporting feeling valued and supported in ways they never had before. But the achievement that made Sarah most proud was her mentorship program. She had created a system where people who had faced discrimination could be paired with allies who wanted to learn and grow. The program had expanded beyond the base, with other military installations requesting guidance on implementation. Major Thompson, the officer who had first mocked her appearance, had become one of her strongest advocates. His required volunteer work with disability organizations had opened his eyes to perspectives he had never considered. He now led monthly training sessions on unconscious bias and had specifically requested to present alongside Sarah at the Pentagon briefing. "I need to tell them about my transformation," he had insisted during their planning meeting. "People need to understand that change is possible. Even for someone like me who was completely wrong." Sarah had agreed, understanding that redemption stories were often more powerful than simple success stories. The morning of the presentation, Colonel Mitchell stopped by her office. In the past 6 months, Their relationship had evolved from commander and subordinate to something more like mentor and protege. Nervous? He asked, noting the stack of index cards on her desk. Terrified, Sarah admitted. I keep thinking about how 6 months ago I was hiding in supply closets, and now I'm supposed to brief Pentagon officials on organizational change. Colonel Mitchell smiled. That transformation is exactly what makes you credible. You're not speaking from theory, you're speaking from lived experience. He sat down across from her desk. Can I share something with you? My daughter Emma is starting her senior year of high school. For the first time in her life, she's talking about her future with confidence. She wants to study special education and become an advocate for students with disabilities. That's wonderful, Sarah said. She sounds like an amazing young woman. She is. But Sarah, she's amazing partly because of your example. I've told her your story about how you transformed from someone who accepted discrimination to someone who fights it. She sees what's possible now. Sarah felt tears forming. I never thought about my work affecting anyone beyond this base. That's the thing about courage, Sarah. It's contagious. When one person stands up and demands better, it gives others permission to do the same. The Pentagon briefing took place in a sterile conference room filled with colonels, generals, and civilian officials. Sarah had prepared extensively, but as she looked around the table, she felt the familiar urge to shrink and disappear. Then she remembered Rodriguez, who had found the courage to report harassment. She remembered Sergeant Williams, who had chosen authenticity over fear. She remembered all the people who had trusted her with their stories and their pain. Sarah straightened her shoulders and began her presentation. Good morning. I'm Sarah Martinez, Base Inclusion Advocate at Nellis Air Force Base. 6 months ago, I was a janitor who was mocked for my facial birthmark. Today, I'm here to tell you how one base transformed its culture and how that transformation can be replicated throughout the military. She spoke for 30 minutes, outlining the systematic approach they had used to change attitudes and behaviors. She talked about the importance of leadership accountability, the power of personal stories, and the need for ongoing education and support, but the most powerful moment came when Major Thompson stood to speak. Ma'am and gentlemen, I was one of the officers who harassed Miss Martinez. I want to be clear about that because accountability is the foundation of real change. I made cruel comments about her appearance, questioned her right to work on our base, and created a hostile environment for someone who was simply trying to do her job. The room was completely silent. The restorative justice process that Miss Martinez and Colonel Mitchell designed didn't just punish me, it educated me. I learned about the daily challenges faced by people with visible differences. I met families affected by discrimination. I came to understand that my words had real impact on real people. Thompson's voice grew stronger. But most importantly, I learned from watching Miss Martinez that leadership isn't about rank or authority. It's about using whatever influence you have to make things better for others. She has taught our entire base about courage, resilience, and the true meaning of service. When the formal presentation ended, Sarah was surrounded by officials asking questions and requesting materials. Several other bases wanted to implement similar programs immediately. General Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking woman in the room, approached Sarah privately. Miss Martinez, have you considered applying to officer candidate school? The Air Force needs leaders like you? Sarah was stunned. Officer candidate school? The idea had never occurred to her. I'm working on my bachelor's degree now, General, but I never thought about becoming an officer. Think about it. Your combination of life experience, educational commitment, and proven leadership ability is exactly what we need in our officer corps. You've already proven you can create positive change. Imagine what you could accomplish with expanded authority and resources. On the flight back to Nevada, Sarah stared out the window at the landscape passing below. Everything in her life had changed, so dramatically that she sometimes felt like she was living someone else's story. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. Saw the news article about your Pentagon briefing. So proud of you, sis. When you become a general, can I get military discounts? Sarah laughed, then thought about General Morrison's suggestion. Officer candidate school. Leadership positions? The opportunity to effect change on an even larger scale, 6 months ago. Her biggest aspiration had been to remain invisible and keep her job. Now she was contemplating a future where she could influence policy and culture across the entire military. When she arrived back at the base, Maria was waiting for her at the security gate. "Mia, I saw you on the news," Maria said, embracing her warmly. "The whole base is talking about how you represented us in Washington." As they walked toward the parking lot, Maria asked, "Do you ever miss the quiet life? When things were simpler?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I miss the simplicity sometimes, but I don't miss feeling powerless. I don't miss accepting things that were wrong just because I thought that was my place. And now? Now I understand that we all have the power to change things, even in small ways. Sometimes especially in small ways." That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with college brochures, officer candidate information, and job offers from 3 different military installations spread out before her. The choices were overwhelming but wonderful. She picked up her phone and called Colonel Mitchell. "How does it feel to have options?" he asked when she explained her situation. "Terrifying and exciting at the same time," she admitted. "But good terrifying, if that makes sense." "Perfect sense. That feeling means you're growing beyond what you thought was possible for yourself." "Colonel, can I ask you something? Do you really think I could be an effective officer?" "Sarah, you've already been an effective leader. You've just been doing it without the uniform. The question isn't whether you could be a good officer. It's whether you want to take on that level of responsibility and commitment." After hanging up, Sarah looked at her reflection in the dark window. The birthmark was there, as always, but she no longer saw it as something that limited her possibilities. It was simply part of the face that belonged to someone who had learned to fight for herself and others. Tomorrow she would start researching. Officer candidate school requirements. Tonight she would celebrate how far she had already come.